So it's been about a month since I uploaded a video, but there is a reason for that. Lately, I've been working on a Minecraft hardcore series, and this first video took a lot longer than I anticipated. I didn't want the beginning to be the same as my last series, so I decided to do my first project in the very first video. This project being transforming an entire village in Minecraft. And this won't just be a normal transformation because every building in the village will have some form of farm connected to it, or at least most of them will. And these farms will relate closely to what the building is about, and I'll get more in depth with it later. But before we can start planning for the village, first we have to complete the game. Now that I've killed the Ender Dragon, I'm going to loot an end city for the Elytra. So I grabbed the dragon egg and built up to the portal before yeeting a pearl into it. When I came out the other side, I increased my render distance and immediately saw an end city with a ship nearby. I killed the shulkers, looted the chest, and grabbed my new set of wings. While here, I also grabbed the dragon head, then began to kill more shulkers to make shulker boxes. After my raid, I went back to the main island, then back into the main portal. And then I was back at spawn. I eventually got back to the pillar I made that marked the portal and got my stuff back. I started looking around for a village and luckily found one not too far from the portal and began to plan on transforming the village. My plan for this village is not just to transform it, but to have basic farms running beneath them. These farms will resemble the villager jobs. Then a building will be made on top of it that represents that farm. The first build I made was a basic villager breeder so that I could populate all of the areas later. Then I trapped 2 nitwits and began breeding them. Now that I had a baby making machine, I decided I also needed some enchantments on my tools and armor. So I made a pit and began putting fetcher tables in to have a source of emeralds. Once the pit was full, I started hollowing out one of the blacksmith buildings where I was able to keep all of my librarians. The first enchantment I got was mending, and I decided to put it on my shovel. This is because a lot of my other stuff were already enchanted and didn't really need it on other things. I was also able to get protection 4, silk touch, unbreaking 3, and of course, efficiency 5. With all of my enchantments obtainable, now I can get started on the village. I began by doing a bit of terraforming, and destroying the village houses. Now that I had a ton of space to work with, I made a couple of small farms so that I had a source of food. It was a pretty simple design, and I did it 4 times. The first was for carrots, then potatoes, and the last 2 were for wheat. With that finished, I was able to work on a space to keep my villagers. I wanted the villagers to have an open space to move around, and I wanted it to have a house for the villager breeder. So I decided to dedicate a large area to make a farmhouse that will have a wheat field. I built some walls to act as a border, and once they were up, I did some terraforming and detailed some to give it a bit more character. When I was satisfied, I began working on the farmhouse. Once the farmhouse was done, I made a simple path, then began making the fields. At first I had the fields going in one direction, but I didn't really like the way it looked and decided to make it go the other direction instead. When the field was fixed, I added the water, tilled the soil, used slabs to cover the water, then began making a small well by the house. When the well was completed, I planted the seeds that I had, then made a new villager breeder, and put the villagers in it. After a bit of cleanup, the build was basically complete, and I just needed to add more seeds to the field as I went along. As I waited for the wheat to grow, I started working on a bridge, but don't get too attached because I ended up not finishing it until much later in the video. I decided to instead do a bit of caving because I was starting to run low on iron. Some skellies began fighting, so I said that I'd go ahead and fight the winner. The enchanted skelly won, so when he was not looking, I attacked. I did some mining, found a new cave, killed some enemies, and mined a bit more. I eventually found a large cave and fought my way through until I discovered a geode. I broke through it and started collecting the crystals and amethyst blocks, and eventually I kind of cleared the entire area. I don't know why, it just happened, but it's completely cleared. I think I mainly did this so that the blocks can grow and I could have as many crystals for later projects. After my mining trip, I went back home and made a portal, but I kind of forgot to record, but honestly I was really doing it to get a little bit of quartz and to fix my tools. After fixing my tools a bit, I was going to start on a tree farm because I was getting tired of chopping down trees. But the materials I needed were going to also take farms to get. One of them being slimes and another being honey. I didn't realize this until after digging a massive hole in the ground because I've never made this farm before. So once the hole was made, I had to put the tree farm on hold for a bit and started working on a slime farm. Luckily, there was a swamp relatively close to my village. Unluckily, I built the farm completely wrong multiple times. My first issue was that I built an underground slime farm on the surface. Because of light level differences, slimes were not spawning in the area, but at the time, I didn't realize that. I also didn't put a roof on it, which also stopped some of the spawning, and I didn't have a ton of iron, so if my iron golem died, I didn't have enough to rebuild him. I did some AFKing off screen and saw it wasn't working, so I did some things at the village to think how I was going to get the slime farm working. I started working on a way to get honey, because I was going to need honey blocks for the tree farm as well. I tried making it automated so I didn't have to sit there and do it the entire time, but of course my redstone skills don't work, and therefore the farm didn't work. So I just sucked it up and did it manually. In between times to grab the honey, I decided to clear out an area and began making an iron farm instead. The main issue with this build is that I made it too close to the surface. So the iron golems were spawning everywhere except in the actual farm. And this was also happening after I already built the building on top. But a part of me is glad that this happened because I wasn't too proud of the way it was looking anyway. I knew that it worked, but it didn't work the way that I needed it to. So I moved the farm down a few more blocks, dropped the villagers and zombie, and started making the blacksmith area look a bit nicer. Once the top portion was done, I now needed to make the working area look a bit better. Now that I had an iron farm, I realized my mistakes with the slime farm, and grabbed the proper materials to make it work. Once the slime farm was done, I AFK'd for a bit and saw that the farm was finally working. It wasn't the most efficient, but it got the job done, and that's what I needed at the moment. Since I had a working slime farm, I was now able to at least start on the tree farm. Also, all the farms I use will be linked down below, so if you want to build any of them for yourself, you can check them out in the description. Just a fair warning, I don't use videos, I prefer text because it's easier for me to understand. As I was working on the tree farm, I continued to go ahead and get honey so that I was able to make the honey blocks, and I gathered other materials that I missed or couldn't get at the time. At one point, I needed to get a very specific coral fan in order to make the TNT duper. Did I spend 3 hours of my life searching for a lukewarm ocean in every direction from the village except in the direction of spawn where I knew there was in fact a coral reef? Yes, I did. And was I pissed at myself for not going in the one direction I knew existed and instead tried finding one even to be a little bit closer? Also, yes. Anyway, I grabbed the fans and went back home to continue the farm. When I finished, I went back into the nether and began to get bone blocks that I can turn into bone meal. I only needed enough for a test since I've never made this farm before. I would hate to have built something over it only for it to blow up everything. So I tested the farm and by some miracle it worked with no hiccups. With the farm ready, it was time to build above the machine. After building the Fletcher's new prison and got them inside, I just needed to wait for a zombie to spawn in the back. While I waited, I began working on a shepherd's area so that I could get all the wool I could ever need. The actual farm was not difficult and I didn't even use a guide to make it, but I did use a guide to make the item sorter. Also, when I made a timer for the droppers, it became really annoying, so at first I lower the block volume, and I later get a mod that allows me to turn off the sound. You're welcome, because it was fucking annoying. After finishing everything for the wool farm, I decorated the building, then started working on the library. The library was going to house the sugarcane farm that I could later turn into paper. I'm not entirely sure why, but when I imagine a library, I think of it being circular with a dome on the top. So that's exactly what I did. I also used quartz in some areas because I think it made the building look a bit more clean, but still match other buildings to some degree. Once the library was done, there were a few other buildings that would help tie the entire project together. The first was a simple dock with a gazebo, and a fisherman hut. Then I made a wizard tower. And I finally finished the bridge I made at the beginning of the video. And the final structure was a fountain that stood in the center. The final piece to tie everything together and make everything look a bit more well put together was the path and the greenery. This was one of my largest projects I've ever done, and it took me many hours to complete and even longer to edit. If you like this video at all, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to watch me make even more builds and hopefully become better at building, then subscribe to the channel. And with that, the build is complete, and I hope to see you in the next one.